Good morning. My name is Justin Villery with the Committee of 70. We are back. We're getting close to the election. It's next Tuesday, May 20th. We are very excited to have Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas candidate Judge Matthew Rudzki, who is joining us. And he will be interviewed this morning by Amelia Dennis, Committee of 70's high school fellow, who is a student at the Baldwin School in Montgomery County. Judge Rudzki, Amelia, thank you very much, both of you, for being on, and I'm going to turn it over to Amelia.
Okay. So my first question was just, can you briefly tell us a little about your background, education, and experience?
Sure. So thanks for having me here today. I am Matt Rudzki, one of the many candidates for the Court of Common Pleas in Allegheny County. I'm currently the district judge for the Fox Chapel area, and I've been on the bench now. This is my fourth year. Prior to taking the bench, I was the mayor of my hometown for 4 years. I also served on council for 7 years in Sharpsburg. And in between all of that, I practiced law privately for 8 years at a small firm, school law, municipal law, some criminal law, some personal injury stuff. I went to W&J Washington and Jefferson College for undergrad, graduated in 2008. I majored in history and German. I took a gap year. I had a Fulbright, and I taught in Austria at two different high schools, taught English. And then when I returned back to the States, I went to Duquesne Klein School of Law and graduated from there in 2013.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, so why are you running to be on the Court of Common Pleas?
Sure. In my time in elected office, I think I've done meaningful work, impactful work, effective work as a council person, as a mayor, and now as a district judge. I've When I took the bench, I became the second judge in the county to introduce a night court option, and we do that for all of our school and juvenile cases. As a former educator, it never made sense to me that we were taking kids out of the classroom to talk about things like truancy. So we do that first Thursday of the month for high schoolers at 3:30, middle schoolers and elementary schoolers at 4:30. And we also reserve time for working folks and families to come in to do traffic court or landlord tenant court so that they don't have to take off a day of work and lose a day's earnings when they're trying to save their housing. I am the only judge in the county out of the 46 magistrates who uses therapy dogs in the courtroom to help lower stress, lower anxiety, to get better results in the courtroom. I also, while I was the mayor of Sharpsburg, advocated for the having embedded social workers in our police department, and council did not hire that person while I was the mayor, but they did after I took the bench. And that social worker is always in my courtroom on criminal court day. I also use a social worker passages to recovery. And I've also eliminated the use of cash bond when I do arraignments. So of all of the magistrates in Allegheny County, I've used approximately $1,500 of cash bond over 3.5 years, approximately 400 arraignments at our city court, which is lower by factors of 10 as compared to the next MDJ. And I participated in a study with the Harvard School of Law, and I found that despite the fact that I shouldn't say despite, I release more defendants than my colleagues do on the bench. And despite the fact that I'm releasing more defendants, my defendants that are released, they appear at higher rates than defendants being arraigned by other judges who are using cash bonds. And they also reoffend at lower rates. And I think if you use a little bit of humanity in the process, you're going to get better results. So, like I said, for me, it's about doing meaningful work, impactful work, and I want to scale up what I've done locally for the 6 communities and the 30,000 residents that I represent to the 1.2 million people of Allegheny County.
Awesome. So could you just describe your general judicial philosophy?
Sure. Yeah, I know I just briefly touched on that. I actually have some graffiti art that I commissioned to hang in my courtroom. Then it's got Lady Justice with the scales and the blindfold, and there's a Latin legal maxim on there that says "Salus populi suprema lex," which is the welfare of the people is the highest law, and that's also the motto of the Duquesne Klein School of Law, my alma mater. And I, often always say I'll always make the moral decision unless the law gets in the way, and or do no harm. But for me, it's about restorative, fair, and accessible justice, and using those tools in the courtroom to get better results, to get people back on their feet, or staying on their feet, delivering services to them, delivering resources to them. not using cash bond, eliminating disparities in the criminal justice system, because they exist and they're there. We know they're there. And then also just making courts more accessible, which is why I do that night court option for the juvenile cases or for working families, or simply starting court on time is one way to make court more accessible. And with the use of the therapy dogs in the courtroom, like I said, to get better results, but it's also trauma-informed justice. It's good for victims, it's good for defendants, it's good for all parties appearing before the court.
Thank you. So I know you touched on some of your accomplishments as a judge. What would you say is your proudest accomplishment?
I don't know if I have a singular proudest accomplishment, but the one thing that I enjoy doing the most, my court gets a lot of traffic cases, and we have probably about 5,000 cases a year in my court. I would say 3,500 of them are traffic cases. And a lot of those folks are coming in because they get caught driving because they have a suspended license, or they never had a license. And they generally don't have a license because, they collect citations, they fail to appear, or they fail to pay for those citations. And district courts thereafter issue license suspensions to the PennDOT, so someone gets their license suspended. And in Pennsylvania, back in 2022, the state passed a law unanimously in both chambers, the upper chamber and the lower chamber, that the governor signed into law. It's Act 163 of 2022. And it allows magistrates to waive fines and fees if we determine that people are unable to pay. So I had a woman, I'll tell an anecdotal story. She came in, she owed about $1,200 in fines and costs. My court had actually issued warrants, and we had sent a suspension letter to PennDOT for her failure to pay. And I asked her to come into the courtroom, and she was a little confused, and she had started to cry. She thought she was in trouble or maybe going to jail. But I started to colloquy her, and I asked, do you receive SNAP benefits? And she said yes. And I asked her, do you have a housing voucher? And she said yes, but she then told me that she was at risk of losing her housing because she had lost her job, because she had lost her license, and she couldn't pay for anything anymore. So armed with all of this information, I was able to waive all of her fines and fees. And she wrote us an email about a month later saying that because she had gotten her license restored, she got hired back at her job. And because she was working again, she was able to save her housing. And we had another gentleman who had lost his license back in like 1988, which is only a couple of years after I was born. And I took the time to get him a restoration letter to explain the process of what he needed to do to get his license restored. And after 35 plus years of driving without a license, this guy finally got his license back, and he got his life back, and he could drive without fear of being pulled over or arrested. So those small victories are always the good ones.
Yeah, thank you. So the Court of Common Pleas oversees a range of cases, right, including criminal, civil, family, and orphans. Which
Correct.
of these do you feel most prepared to handle?
Sure, I could hit the ground running in any one of those divisions. A lot of my practice was estate planning and administration, which is handled in orphans court. For family court, as district judges, we do handle juvenile cases, which is about half the docket of the family division. We also handle emergency PFAs, which is a large part of the duties of the family division judges. When it comes to criminal court, as you probably can gather, I'm one of those criminal justice reformers. As district judges, we arraign defendants upon arrest. We have their preliminary hearings to determine whether there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. So I could definitely slip it into the criminal division quite easily. And civil division, like I said, the bulk of my practice was school law, municipal law, which includes right to know, sunshine, elections, sheriff sale work. So I could slot into the civil division as well and sort of be that municipal law guru who's doing those sorts of cases.
Great, thank you. So can you identify a challenge that the justice system faces today, either in Allegheny County or in a broader sense? And can you describe what you would do in order to tackle this challenge?
Sure. So I touched on it a little bit earlier. We know there are disparities in our criminal justice system. In Allegheny County a few years ago, there was a study that was commissioned by our previous county executive, and it was done through the Rand Corporation in conjunction with the University of Pittsburgh. And in that report, it basically told us everything that we already knew, which was that our criminal justice system here in Allegheny County disproportionately affects people of color, especially young Black men. And here in Allegheny County, the Allegheny County Jail, the population it's a rolling number, but generally it's anywhere between those incarcerated. 65% to 70% of the population is Black men, but in Allegheny County, the Black population is only about 13%. So we have to question why this disparity exists. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use cash bail. I don't want to perpetuate this two-tier justice system where people who cannot afford to post bond get stuck in jail, and those who can afford to post bond and get released doesn't necessarily make our communities any safer. One of the frustrating things for me when I was still practicing law was, just starting court on time. The longest I ever waited for a judge was probably about 90 minutes. And there's dozens of lawyers, dozens of parties in the courtroom, witnesses, victims, defendants, and they're all waiting. So I always start court early or on time. I was invited to do traffic court at Pittsburgh Municipal Court, which is one of our administrative courts, probably 3 or 4 months onto the job. And I got there like 10 to 8. The summons that goes out to all of the defendants says court starts at 8 o'clock. There was no one to be found, no clerks, no police officers. Around 8 o'clock, a clerk showed up and looked at me like I had 3 heads. And by 8:15, I started dismissing all of the cases, for at least cases where there was no officer present. It took me 3 years to get invited back to traffic court. But the point of the story is when you've got 30, 40 people waiting in a courtroom and they're sitting there for an extra hour or two, that's 40 to 80 hours worth of time that's lost where those individuals could have been at work. They could have been earning money. They could have been caring for their family. So the simple thing of starting court on time can go a long way to fixing our court systems.
Thank you. What is a quality that you think that all judges should have?
I would say the number one quality is temperament. Having a proper judicial temperament goes a long way. I try to be as patient as possible while I'm on the bench. I try to be empathetic and understanding. Generally, when we are seeing people in the courtroom, we are seeing them on probably what is one of their worst days because of maybe one mistake that they made at a singular point in time. And we can't judge people on what may have happened in 1 hour of their day at some point in time. You need to take the individual as a whole. I always try to take a holistic approach. I generally find that most people are restorable. I've encountered tens of thousands of defendants at this point in my time on the bench. And, with the exception of maybe a half dozen people, I would say that most of them are redeemable. And there are, of course, people who need to be held to account. So for me, it's that empathy, it's that compassion, it's the mercy, and it's, that judicial temperament, which is just staying calm, cool, and collected on the bench and never letting your emotions get the better of you.
Thank you. Why do you think it's important for young people to vote?
Yeah, so it's, voting is a right. It's guaranteed to all of us in the Constitution. And you have a voice at 18 years old to form the government that best represents you. It's, we're in wild times right now, especially at the federal level. And, my generation down to your generation makes up the largest voting bloc in the country. But the people who represent us aren't representative of our, the millennials or, your generation. So we really need to encourage all young people that, the Constitution guarantees you the right to vote. And we have fought and people have fought and they've died in wars to defend those rights. And to have an elective democracy like we have is probably one of the greatest things that we can do as a people. And we need to use those votes, like I said, to continue to elect people that represent us and represent our values and our philosophies.
Thank you. Um, so how have you worked to promote youth involvement in the judicial system, or how would you work to do that in the future?
Yeah, so one of my favorite things, I generally at least 2 to 3 times a year have Boy Scout groups or Girl Scouts coming into the courtroom when they're trying to earn their government badges. And I have families or, parents that reach out who are, my age or who I went to school with. My children are actually 5.5, 3, and 1. So they'll be getting into the BSA and Girl Scouts here shortly. Um, but, bringing kids into court and, sort of peeling back the layers of the onion. I think when people think of judges, they imagine someone in a robe just sort of sequestered into their courtroom, and not really having much access to the outside world. But I try to be as approachable and accessible as possible. I maintain a social media presence on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Blue Sky. And I try to post about what we're doing in the courtroom. When we have the dogs on the docket, I'm posting about that. When we have the night forward, I post about it. When I do weddings, I post, or little Q&As about what the courts are, what we do, and trying to promote confidence in the courts.
Great. So just for the voters to get to know you better, what's a fun fact about you?
A fun fact about me. Huh, I don't think I've ever gotten this question before. Well, I did. So I did study German and history. Like I said, I spent 2 years in Germany in undergrad, and also while I was in law school, I was a research assistant for a professor at the University of Cologne. And then like I said, I did my Fulbright in Austria for a year when I was teaching. But unfortunately, I can still read and write and understand German, but I do not speak German as well as I used to, and I was fluent at one point in time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to address? Any questions that I maybe should have asked, but I didn't?
No, I mean, I think you asked some great questions. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, yeah.
What are your plans post high school?
Next year I'm planning to go to Princeton and study political science.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
One of my former interns in my course, she's probably going to be a senior at Princeton next year if my time is right. Because
Oh,
I want to say she interned with me in my first year. So congratulations. That is awesome.
thank
Do
you.
you plan to get into politics?
Hopefully, yeah. That's the
Do you
plan.
do you want to go to law school after Princeton?
Possibly.
Possibly. Where are you thinking for law school?
Oh, I don't know.
Because Princeton does not have a law school.
No, yeah. No
Fun
grad.
fact that many people don't know.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both very much. That was a great interview. Kids 5, 3, and 1. Is that what I heard? That's
Yeah, it's just absolute chaos.
you're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Your Honor, for joining us this morning. Only 4 days to the election, so I'm sure you're busy. Thank you, Amelia, for your work to guide the interview. Best of luck
Thank you.
in the election next Tuesday.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Good luck at Princeton next year.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.